Karen never imagined the woman she tried to bully at the community pool was not just any ordinary pool-goer. She was the town's police chief, and what started as a petty confrontation would soon escalate into a legal battle that would change both their lives forever. It was a scorching summer afternoon, and the community pool was a welcome refuge for the residents of the quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the water as families and friends gathered to enjoy the day. The air was filled with the sound of splashing, laughter, and the occasional shrill whistle of a lifeguard overseeing the activity. For most, the pool was a place to unwind and escape the stresses of daily life, a space where everyone was meant to feel welcome. But for one woman, this day would prove to be anything but relaxing. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for years, and she was known to have strong opinions about almost everything. Often, her opinions came across as harsh and uninvited, especially when it came to what she perceived as the proper way things should be done. Whether it was the way someone parked their car or the types of people who frequented the pool, Karen felt it was her duty to voice what she thought was right. That afternoon, as she made her way to the pool, she didn't anticipate that she was about to cause a stir. The pool was busy, but there was an empty lounge chair near the deep end where the sun was brightest. Karen laid down her towel, adjusted her sunglasses, and scanned the area to see who was around. Her eyes landed on a woman lying by the pool, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. She was a black woman, dressed in a simple bathing suit with a book in hand. From where Karen stood, it appeared that the woman was content, enjoying the day just like anyone else. But for some reason, something about her presence bothered Karen. Without any real understanding of why, Karen felt compelled to walk over. Her footsteps were firm and deliberate, as if she were preparing to address a problem that had only existed in her mind. As she approached, the woman didn't seem to notice her, lost in the pages of her book. Karen hesitated for a moment, but quickly dismissed any second thoughts. She was certain something needed to be said. Standing over the woman, Karen looked down at her and, without any preamble, told her she needed to leave. The woman glanced up from her book, momentarily confused, as Karen repeated her demand. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice dripping with a tone of authority that suggested she had every right to enforce such a claim. The black woman blinked, still trying to process what was happening. She was a regular at this pool, a member of the community who had spent countless hours here before. Why was she being told to leave? She tried to understand the reasoning, but it seemed there was none. There was no reason other than the fact that Karen had decided in that moment that the woman didn't fit in. The woman stood up, the warmth of the sun on her face contrasting with the tension beginning to rise between them. She was caught off guard by the strange interaction, but remained composed. What Karen didn't know was that she had just made a huge mistake. The woman wasn't just another pool-goer. She wasn't someone to be pushed around or intimidated. The black woman had spent years working to gain her position, and it was one that commanded respect. She was the police chief of the very town they lived in. But, as she stood there, she was just a woman who wanted to relax by the pool, unaware that this was the moment that would change everything. The black woman stood tall, her composure unwavering despite the bizarre confrontation. As Karen's words echoed in her ears, a sense of disbelief washed over her. She had experienced discrimination before, but never in such a personal and unexpected way. It was hard to fathom that someone, anyone, would have the audacity to challenge her right to be at the pool, especially considering how many times she had come here without issue. But as Karen continued her verbal assault, demanding that she leave, the black woman's mind shifted from confusion to calm resolve. She took a slow breath, trying to steady the growing anger within her. She could feel the stares of the other people at the pool, the quiet murmurs growing around her. It was clear that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for herself and making sure the situation didn't escalate further. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. For a brief moment, the black woman considered simply walking away. She had the option to just leave the situation behind and enjoy the rest of the day elsewhere. But something about Karen's entitled tone, the way she spoke with so much certainty, made her pause. This wasn't just a random disagreement over a lounge chair. This was a moment of injustice, a display of prejudice that couldn't be ignored. And that's when she decided to take control of the situation in a way Karen would never expect. Without hesitation, the black woman stood up, straightening her posture as she removed her sunglasses. The weight of her words hung in the air as she revealed the truth that Karen had never even considered. She wasn't just any woman at the pool. She was the police chief of the very town they lived in. Karen paused for a moment, blinking in disbelief. Her eyes widened slightly, and the words seemed to catch in her throat. She wasn't prepared for this revelation. She had assumed, based on her own biased thinking, that the woman before her had no authority, no power, and no standing in the community. After all, in Karen's mind, someone who looked different, someone who wasn't from her same social circle, couldn't possibly be in charge of anything. But she was wrong. The black woman could see the confusion in Karen's eyes, the realization beginning to settle in, but Karen was quick to recover. A layer of defensiveness replaced her earlier arrogance. She was unwilling to accept the idea that she had just attempted to harass someone who held a position of authority. Karen's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this a misunderstanding? Could she really be talking to the police chief? The woman in front of her appeared calm and unruffled, not the least bit fazed by the confrontation, which only seemed to add to the confusion. The black woman, however, didn't need to say more. Her mere presence, her unshaken confidence, spoke volumes. She had worked for years to get where she was, overcoming countless hurdles to prove herself in a male-dominated, predominantly white field. She didn't need to shout or assert her power. Her role, her position, was enough to command respect, and she wasn't going to let Karen's unfounded aggression go unchallenged. As Karen stood there processing the information, a shift occurred in the air between them. The balance of power had just changed, but Karen, still resistant, couldn't let go of her belief that she was in the right. The situation was slipping further from her control, and though she attempted to hold on to the belief that she could bully her way out, the reality of who she was facing started to sink in. For the black woman, this moment wasn't just about protecting her own dignity. It was a turning point, a subtle yet powerful reminder of the biases people could carry with them, often unknowingly. But she wasn't about to let Karen's preconceived notions shape this day. Instead, she prepared for the next step, knowing this encounter was far from over. Karen's face flushed with a mixture of surprise and disbelief, as the weight of the situation began to settle in. She had expected the woman to cower or apologize, perhaps even leave the pool. But instead, she stood her ground. The black woman had calmly revealed her identity as the police chief, and the shift in the air was palpable. Yet Karen wasn't ready to back down. Instead of taking a step back or apologizing for her rude assumption, Karen doubled down. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. How could this woman possibly be the police chief? In her mind, it didn't make sense. She couldn't reconcile the authority that this woman held with the image she had of who should hold such a position. The internal conflict was clear on her face. Without even thinking, Karen's instincts led her to dismiss the woman's claim. She insisted it was a mistake. Maybe this was a case of mistaken identity or some sort of misunderstanding. She couldn't bring herself to believe that the woman she had been so dismissive of was truly someone of importance, someone with power. It was as though her perception of authority was locked into a certain mold, one that didn't include someone who looked like the woman before her. "That can't be right," Karen muttered under her breath, her voice trembling with disbelief. Her posture shifted, a defensive energy building within her as she clung to the idea that she was justified in her actions. "You're just trying to get out of this," she muttered, almost as if convincing herself that the black woman was the one at fault. The woman remained composed, not reacting to Karen's outbursts. She knew that this wasn't just a matter of a simple misunderstanding. Karen wasn't questioning her position because of a mistake. She was challenging it because she didn't believe someone like her could hold such a role. She could feel the weight of the assumptions Karen was projecting onto her, but she didn't allow herself to be shaken. As the conversation continued, other people at the pool began to take notice. The initial whispers grew louder, and heads turned to watch the escalating confrontation. Some people began to whisper to each other, exchanging glances and murmurs of disbelief. They had seen the two women exchange words, and now they were witnessing the fallout. They could sense the tension building, aware that this was no ordinary argument over pool space. Something larger was at play. The black woman, aware of the eyes on her, took a deep breath and chose to remain calm. She knew her role wasn't just as the police chief, but also as a figure of authority in the community. Her responsibility was not only to uphold the law, but also to set an example. She couldn't afford to let Karen's prejudice disrupt her professionalism, even in this personal setting. "I am the police chief," she repeated, her voice unwavering. "And what you're doing right now isn't just wrong, it's illegal." There was no anger in her voice, no shout of outrage, only quiet authority. She wasn't playing into the drama. She wasn't going to let Karen's refusal to believe the truth escalate into something more volatile. The power of the moment lay in her calmness. Karen's face turned a deeper shade of red as she grappled with the words she had just heard. The realization was slowly dawning on her, but she couldn't yet fully accept it. She still couldn't let go of her preconceived notions. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out of this mess she had created. But instead of apologizing, she dug her heels in even further, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge that she had just crossed a line. As the black woman looked around, she saw that some of the people who had been watching were now taking out their phones, likely recording the encounter. In that moment, she knew this wasn't just about her. The situation had become bigger than one heated argument at a community pool. This was a moment where the very issues of race, bias, and authority were colliding in front of witnesses. The black woman held steady, knowing that the situation was on the edge of something much larger than Karen's refusal to apologize. There was no turning back. Whatever happened next, she had made it clear that she wasn't going to allow Karen to control the narrative. The ball was in Karen's court now. She could either own her actions and apologize, or she could face the consequences of her assumptions. As the situation continued to unfold, the tension between the two women was palpable. The black woman, the police chief, had done everything in her power to remain calm and composed, but the reality of what had just transpired started to sink in. She wasn't about to let Karen's ignorance slide. The moment had escalated far beyond a simple poolside dispute, and the weight of that realization wasn't lost on her. As Karen stood there, still trying to wrap her head around what was happening, the woman knew it was time to act. Her calm demeanor was more than just a defense mechanism. It was a deliberate choice, a way to diffuse the situation while still taking control of it. She didn't need to shout or react aggressively. She had the power, and she would use it in the most professional way possible. Her decision was made. She wasn't just going to walk away from this, and she wasn't going to let Karen get away with her behavior. As the crowd around them began to murmur more loudly, some of the witnesses even began to pull out their phones, clearly sensing that they were witnessing something significant. The black woman reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, dialing the non-emergency police line. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. "Yes, I need someone to come to the community pool immediately," she said, giving the location and briefly explaining the situation. "I am the police chief and I need assistance with an individual who is refusing to comply with basic pool rules and is making discriminatory remarks." She didn't raise her voice or try to escalate the situation further. She just stated the facts, calmly and clearly. The operator on the other end of the line paused before confirming the details, and in that short moment, Karen's defiant stance seemed to falter just slightly. Karen had been too proud, too set in her narrow view of who could belong in places like this. She had assumed that her actions would be unquestioned, that no one would dare stand up to her. But the reality of the situation, as the black woman made the call and identified herself once again as the police chief, was beginning to sink in. The wheels of bureaucracy and law enforcement were now set into motion. This wasn't just an isolated moment. It was a reminder that power, when wielded responsibly, could have far-reaching consequences. As she waited for the authorities to arrive, the black woman turned her attention back to Karen, whose expression had changed. The red flush on her face deepened as she realized that her behavior had gone from petty confrontation to something far more serious. The whispers around them had only grown louder, and she could feel the weight of the community's collective gaze. People were watching, some sympathetic to the black woman's calm authority, while others were eager to see how this strange drama would unfold. The pool had once been a place of relaxation, but now it felt like a theater of tension. Moments later, 2 officers arrived at the pool. They didn't need to ask many questions. The black woman's calm and collected explanation of what had transpired, coupled with the growing number of witnesses who had seen Karen's actions, told them all they needed to know. The officers quickly took Karen aside, asking her to step away from the crowd to avoid further disruption. They spoke to her, asking for her side of the story, but it was clear that the evidence was against her. Karen's face twisted with frustration and denial as she tried to explain herself, but it was no use. The police chief's professionalism, the witnesses, and the reality of her actions had put her in a corner she couldn't talk her way out of. The officers informed her that they would be filing a report, and it would likely go to court. It wasn't just a matter of her being rude or disrespectful anymore. It was a case of harassment and racial discrimination. As Karen was led away, still muttering about misunderstandings, the black woman remained calm, her focus now on making sure this incident was handled properly. She wasn't interested in the drama. She wasn't interested in playing into Karen's narrative. She had done what needed to be done, not just for herself, but for the community she served. The moment was a quiet victory, not because of the outcome, but because of how the black woman had handled herself. She had turned a moment of hostility into an opportunity for justice, something far more powerful than anything Karen could have imagined. The poolside encounter was far from over, but the first chapter in this unexpected confrontation had concluded, and the balance of power had shifted. The black woman had proven that even in the most unlikely of places, authority and dignity could still prevail. The aftermath of the poolside encounter was a turning point, not just for the two women involved, but for the entire community. The events that had unfolded over a seemingly trivial disagreement had far-reaching consequences, and the ripple effects were felt well beyond the confines of the pool. Karen, once an active member of the neighborhood, now found herself facing charges that she never could have predicted. The case quickly became a point of contention in the local news, drawing attention from both supporters of the black woman's calm and authoritative response and those who questioned the severity of the situation. As the story made its way through the legal system, Karen found herself in a very different position from the one she had been accustomed to. No longer a respected figure in her own eyes, she was now a subject of public scrutiny. Her behavior, once dismissed as an unfortunate misunderstanding, was now examined under a much harsher light. The trial brought with it difficult conversations about race, privilege, and power dynamics within communities that many had avoided for years. Karen's defense team attempted to downplay the seriousness of her actions, framing it as a misunderstanding between two individuals. But it was clear that the damage had been done. Meanwhile, the black woman, the police chief, became an unexpected symbol of strength and dignity. She had handled the situation with a calmness that commanded respect, and her professional response to Karen's outburst set a standard for how difficult situations should be addressed. Despite the personal nature of the incident, the black woman chose to rise above the petty confrontation and use the experience to educate and inform. She took the opportunity to speak at community meetings, sharing her perspective on the challenges of racial bias, how it manifests in everyday interactions, and the importance of confronting prejudice head-on. Her role as police chief meant she had a platform that could not only address the immediate situation, but also spark necessary conversations about systemic issues in law enforcement, community trust, and the broader society. She was determined to use the attention on the case to push for change, advocating for training and discussions within the department on bias and racial sensitivity. But even as she spoke publicly about the incident, she remained focused on the lesson it offered to both herself and others. As for the community, the incident became a moment of reckoning. The poolside argument, which had seemed so small at first, had revealed a larger, uncomfortable truth about how prejudice could lurk in the most unsuspecting places. It was no longer just about one woman telling another to leave. It was about understanding how ingrained biases could shape how people interacted with one another and how those biases were often left unchecked. It was a reminder that even in seemingly mundane moments, prejudice could rear its ugly head, and it had the power to disrupt lives. Karen's future in the community was forever altered. Her reputation, once secure, had been shattered. The court proceedings left her isolated, her actions serving as a cautionary tale for those who believed they could act without consequence. The lesson for her was harsh. The privilege of assuming authority over others, especially based on assumptions rooted in racial bias, came with a cost. The black woman, however, emerged from the ordeal stronger and more determined. She knew that the incident would not be forgotten, but she also understood the importance of leading by example. In the end, it wasn't about the victory she had gained in that moment. It was about showing the community that prejudice had no place in public spaces, and that power could be used not to intimidate, but to uplift and educate. The lesson, clear and undeniable, was that every interaction carries weight, and the way people choose to treat others reflects more than just their personal values. It can shape the community around them. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right, even in the face of adversity, has the potential to change lives, to shift perspectives, and to set new standards for how people should treat each other, no matter their background. The poolside confrontation had been an unfortunate event, but it had also been a moment of profound transformation for the community.